Hey, I'm Greg Atkinson. I am here with an old friend, Bobby Gruenewald, who is pastor of innovation at Life.Church with Pastor Craig Rochelle. Many of you watch them online or have used their resources. Bobby is also the founder of YouVersion, the Bible app. I use it every day. Many of you around the world use the YouVersion Bible app. And so we're honored to have him here. Bobby, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Greg. And I'm glad to know that we're friends. We are friends and been friends for a while, but I'm also old. You're absolutely right. I've gotten a lot older.
We all have. We all have. Time flies. Time flies. It's been well over a decade since the first time I came out to Life.Church and hung out and spent time in offices there. So time flies. But, last year we talked about hospitality and the hospitality culture. And we heard from some of your staff, Rachel and Josh, and they talked about developing a culture of hospitality. And this year, as we talk about navigating a new season of ministry, I want to tap into what I call the other side of hospitality. I've always said that hospitality and generosity are two sides of the same coin. And you guys are the most generous church I know. You create resources that you just give away, and you bless the Big C church in so many great ways, from things like the CHOP Church Online platform. There's 30,000 churches signed up for that, about 10,000 a week using it. And Open, which has tons of resources for churches, and obviously the Bible app. People all around the world. Is it like 400 million that are reading this the Bible? The Bible is just incredible. But tell us a little bit about what it's like to, as a church, operate open-handedly where you are giving away, and it costs you. I saw a message just recently where Pastor Craig Rochelle was firing up the congregation, and he was talking about vision and the church, and we are the church. But he said, this cost us something. It cost us money to give away these products to other churches. And so what is it like being inside that system, inside the leadership of a culture that wants to give away resources?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and we're definitely. First of all, we're very honored to do it, but I think it's probably good to even contrast what it was like before we did that, because I think most people's presumption is that we've done that all along. And we were a church that started back in 1996 and grew relatively fast back at the time. In fact, really fast, I guess, by comparison to what might be average for growth. And so we were dealing with problems that were growth problems, like many churches do today. I know there's many churches that have had really fast trajectories of growth, and we wanted to reach as many people as we could. And so we really had this word focus that we would use a lot to describe, like, we were going to really be focused on certain things, and there's a lot of things we're not going to do, and had lots of kind of principles that drove how we grew. And we were constantly trying to keep up with the growth for the first 10 years. And so I was a part of most of that journey in the church as we launched new campuses, became a multi-site church, started to see the growth. And we were financially at that time really just doing everything we could to keep up with it. I mean, it was not terrible situation, because I think some people could handle financial challenges that are growth related versus financial challenges that are not growth related. We were having a lot of growth related financial challenges where we had needs. We had people that just were coming into church, in large numbers. We needed new buildings, new facilities. We needed permanent facilities where we had temporary ones. And so we were borrowing as much money as the bank would loan us. It was kind of a hand-to-mouth situation where money was coming in and we were having to really just meet payroll or whatever expenses we had that given week. And that was sort of the environment. I share that just to bring some context and some contrast a little bit, because it was in the middle of that environment where we didn't really know this or understand this about ourselves. But in retrospect, that season that we were in, we were so focused that we would help other churches if they asked, but we were doing pretty much everything we could to keep focused on what we were doing. And sometimes inadvertently, I think that would come across to others as they don't have really time, for us. And we definitely weren't going out of our way to help others. We were pretty much saying, look, we got enough things to solve here. We have enough needs for resources that we really don't have time to do all these other things and help all these other churches. So it's more like we really weren't generous, I guess is the best way to say. We weren't generous with our time. We weren't generous with our resources. We had lots of reasons why we weren't, but the reality was we weren't. So that was the way it was up until January of 2006. And in January of 2006, we felt like God had just been putting something in our hearts as a leadership team that we couldn't shake. We were had opportunities to sell our resources. We had publishers coming in and wanting to package them up. Any of the creative stuff we were creating, they said they were taking notice of it and thought other churches could benefit from it. It could be a revenue stream that helps us produce those resources. All of that made sense to us. I was a former business guy. This made complete sense to me. But there was some kind of check that God put inside of us that just said, I think I want you to take a different path. And I really feel like the key for us was to release those resources to the church and to just give them away for free. Now, there were kind of two things that made this possible at the time. One was that we had not really established a lot of dependency on selling the resources. So we had not built a team and staff and everything to sell it. So that was, I think, it turned out to be a positive. But the other is that technology had reached a tipping point to where the ability to deliver all these things digitally, video files and full resolution graphics files, and to kind of use the internet as a distribution vehicle for the resource. That also right at the point where cable modems and high-speed connections and all that were happening. And so those two things combined made it possible. However, the real step was a step of obedience. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't based on, if we do this, then all these things will happen, or we'll be able to have this kind of impact. It really wasn't even based on quantifying what we thought the ministry impact would be. It was really just purely us going, this is what we think God's calling us to do. We don't know why, because we could really use the resource right now. I mean, we had high debt, high need for cash, all of those things. And we knew that doing it, even though there's digital distribution, was going to cost us money to actually do it. We would actually have to have team resources and spend money to build the website, to put the things together to do it. And it was going to take a lot of commitment to it, because you could say you want to do it, but then actually following through and making sure the files all get put together, making sure that that's not the last task that never quite gets finished, but that it gets done. So I'm giving you kind of a long version of the story, but the decision was made in January of 2006 to step into that in faith, just trusting that this was God's direction and where we wanted to go, where He wanted us to go with it. And we launched in March of 2006 this website called Open, and it started off by taking anything we had the license to give away, our graphics files, video clips, whatever we produced, take our name off of it and allow other churches to use those as free resources. No cost whatsoever, no attribution required, no request that they give back, no pressure to try to donate, just a free resource that's a kingdom resource. And we thought that would help other churches, but we had no idea how it would change us. And what really happened, what God did, was transform our staff, our team, our entire church, really, and the thinking around generosity, because as we begin to see what God did with it, He began to change our hearts. And so today, 14 years later, or more than 14 years later, we look back on that and realize that was one of those catalytic moments where God changed our hearts. He changed the financial trajectory of our church. Again, it wasn't a strategy, but that actually was one of the outcomes. We'd never borrowed a dollar since the day that we made that decision. And at that point in time, we were trying to borrow as much as we could find, as the bank would loan us. And that's nothing against borrowing. It just is an indicator or of an outcome of God's provided all the resource that we need as a church to grow over these last 14 years have all come just as a result of Him responding and Him bringing the resource to our church. And so we've been blessed in so many different ways. And today our heart from the very beginning of anything we do is this kind of question of, okay, how can this benefit the capital C Church? How can we help serve other churches? And it hasn't come at the cost of our church growing. It hasn't come at the cost of continuing to see tremendous local church growth within our own church. And I think that's something I want to encourage people with on multiple fronts. One is just say that serving other churches isn't to the detriment of the growth of your own church, which I think some people feel like that's the trade. And that would have been the way we thought about it in the first 10 years. The more that we focus on helping others, probably the less we have for ourselves, focus on ourselves. And then I think the other takeaway that I hope people get is that you can start at any time. Meaning, if for some reason this hasn't been a value or typified how you function or operate as a church leader over these years, you could start today. And that's the way it was for us, and today generosity is a value that hangs on our wall, and we talk about it and we embrace it fully. It might've been words we used in the first 10 years, but it wasn't a deep value that really represented who we are. And it's an example of something that we sort of inherited or developed, along the way versus just wrote down on a sheet of paper and claimed. So that's something but thank you for highlighting it. I think that hopefully people get inspired to think how they could be a contribution to the Capital City Church. I mean, we're doing the parts that we feel equipped to do. Every church is going to sort of be different in what parts they could contribute and what they could bring to the Capital City Church. But I know that God will honor it.
Yeah, I love it. You talked about obedience and you talked about different seasons of the church, and this theme this year, is navigating a new season. I love it. I think about you talking about back when you were borrowing as much money as you could get. And I know if I remember right, one of your values is bet the farm, risk takers, and you guys were taking risk and doing this kind of stuff. But, one of the things I've said for years, and it's apparent in your story of your church and that you can hear in this testimony, as I've always said, you can't outgive God. And you guys just keep giving more and more and more away, but you're not having to keep borrowing and getting in debt. God is providing. God's provision prevails, and it's just beautiful to see. I remember, and so this may be a new season for somebody else's church. I remember when the pandemic first hit. This was back in early March of 2020. Churches had to close down and they had to go online for the first time, and they had to broadcast, and they had to stream their services, which many churches had never done before. And somebody posted a post that I highlighted in my Facebook group, Weekend Worship and Guest Services. There was a post that got like 500 likes on it where somebody said, hey, we're a large church. If you're a smaller church in the area and you don't have studio equipment, you don't have cameras, and you want to come use our stage and our platform and stand up here, we'll record it for you and we'll produce this for you. And somebody had commented, this is the church being the church. And I just shared it in my group, and it blew up because people were saying, hey, if you need help getting online, we'll help you get online. And this was a church of like 1,000 people. It wasn't as large as you guys, but they were saying, we'll give you what we can to help churches that are even smaller. And so what have you learned during this COVID season as you're navigating in your own way a new season of ministry? You've had to, so you are now, by the time this airs, up to about 36 campuses, and they're obviously in different states, different cities, different regulations, different city protocols. Some have, you can have this many people or this much percentage of this capacity. How are you navigating such a large-scale organization with several limitations depending on where that campus may reside? How are you navigating this season?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that we don't really see ourselves as large, first of all, and we try not to think that way as far as the decisions that we make at a church. So if we were just one local church in one community and not in 36 different communities, with the values and kind of the culture that we have here at Life.Church, we're going to be aggressively trying to meet people where they are. We have been online for many years. We started church online back in 2006. And for us, online ministry has always been a both and, not an either or, meaning we have always tried to use digital tools. I say always, for many years, I should say, tried to use digital tools to reach people in communities and places where they couldn't come to church physically. back in March, as you referenced, this was sort of the reality for everyone. No one could come to church physically back in March. And so digital tools became the only mechanism or the primary mechanism to be able to reach people at that point in time. And then as communities begin to open up and as cities begin to open up for physical church environments with some different levels of restriction and different, things that were kind of required to do that. If we were just one local church in one community and that community said, hey, you now have the ability to meet at reduced capacity or with these guidelines, there's no question that one location at that one community would say, we're definitely going to open the doors because we want to be able to meet the needs of people that want to connect physically in that context. But we also will provide a church online experience to connect those that can't, because we recognize that people are sort of in different, come from different perspectives and also have different realities that they're living in right now. Some people have, underlying conditions or happen to be at high risk categories for their health. Some people just have a lot of fear, about being in environments. They might not have, health particular reasons, but just the fear and the anxiety that they have around it's very real. And we want to be able to be a church that meets them where they are. And yet there's other people that are craving in-person human connection, and so we say, we'll provide a safe environment for that to happen. And we'll follow all the guidelines, that are provided. But if we were one church in one location, that one church in that one location would be finding everything we could do to meet people in all of those different situations and be the church in that community. So when we think about Life.Church in 36 different locations, we just think about that times 36, meaning each location we look at and say, okay, what's the best opportunity in this community for us to meet? What are the guidelines? What are the rules? There were situations where we're in a couple different schools, in certain communities. Most of our facilities are permanent facilities. In fact, almost all of them are. So we really, at that point, just have to follow local guidelines. But when we're using someone else's facility, now we don't just have the local guidelines, but we also have kind of whether the facility is willing to let us meet. And so we had some scenarios where we couldn't, in those environments. So then we began to look for alternatives, because if we were one church in one location in that community, we would not sort of settle for, well, we can't in this school. We would say, well, is there another place we can? Is there another location we can? And so that's basically what we've done. And today we have all of our locations. And at the time it's recording, obviously things can change in different cities and different parts of the country. But as of right now, while we're recording this, all of our locations are open in every state. Different ones have different guidelines and restrictions. But what our key, though, is we're wanting to provide a very safe environment for people where they can feel welcome. And we're finding that there's a group of people that really need that during this time, that really are seeking that community. At the same time that we're doing that, we're also very aggressively creating a welcoming environment online and wanting to make sure that people that can't come, that have reasons they're not able to come, feel welcome, they feel connected, they feel like they're a part of our church, and that they're not second-class Christians because they are attending digitally, but rather that this is church, for them in this season. And we're kind of committed to all of those different groups of people and meet them where they're at.
Yeah, we've got Alan George from you guys speaking at this conference, and he's such a good online pastor, so relational, so authentic, so genuine, so good, pastoring people through a lens, through a camera.
Yeah.
And just a great guy. But you guys, you mentioned schools. I was just a year or two ago, I was there on the second Sunday when the Omaha, Nebraska campus opened up in a school, and I was there and got to worship. And you guys had all your system down. You had every single thing in place, and you were doing a really cool thing, which I thought was a great idea. You had free T-shirts that you were giving out to everybody to wear in the community, letting people know that there was a new campus, there was a new church in town. And so everybody got like a red shirt that they could take, and it had every size from very small to very large. They had a size that could fit me. I grabbed one, but you had all these size shirts that just basically said, we're open now, or come check us out. But I was there on week 2 and watching the ushers put out the chairs. And I've talked about this concept over the years of the intensity of density, where you have just enough chairs for the people that are in the room, So if there's 50 people in the room, there's 50 chairs. So it feels packed. And it's like where the Duke Blue Devils play, and why Duke has a home advantage when you're at Cameron Indoor Stadium, because it's so packed and so crammed that it just feels exciting and electric and vibrant. And so even though the room could hold maybe 500 chairs, you put out what was needed, and the system and watching these ushers come and add, and it was just so smooth and operating. And you had the portable kids ministry set up in a school and cafe, and it was just really well done. It was great to see such a young campus on the second week, how they were just knocking it out of the park.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because you talk about that, and then obviously during COVID and during the pandemic, there's a lot of tension, between creating an environment that feels dense or is dense, in terms of the intensity of the density, or what's the phrase that you use. Right. And so that's been a challenge, but I really feel like the teams have done a great job of adapting to that, because what we're dealing with now is you want people to feel safe, but you also want to create an environment that doesn't feel dead, that has life and energy. And so we've managed to do that pretty effectively with spacing and the ways that we've created kind of our environment as you walk in. There's definitely things that are way different than what they were before. But what's kind of interesting, I find myself really forgetting about how many people in the room, because visually, the way they're spread out, it actually feels like there's a lot of people in the room. But if I look into my immediate surroundings of where I'm standing, I'm spaced more than 6 feet, from everyone. But when you are kind of take a macro view and step back from it, it actually makes the room feel full, the way that it looks. So it's kind of it's something I don't know we would have ever tried before, absent a pandemic, because some of the concept of that density is sort of the intensity of how close you put people together and how that feels. But I think we've managed to find this sort of new dynamic where the room feels full but yet it's not, and yet there's plenty of space for me to feel safe if I'm concerned about how close I would be, and to follow, of course, the guidelines, that are there for each area. Now, what's also helped, though, is I think many of the people that are coming physically right now, we have a higher percentage of them that are very committed followers of Jesus that would have been craving coming to church and worshiping, in that environment. They were, just looking forward to this for weeks or months, to do it. So the level of engagement, I think the level of sort of appreciation of the opportunity to do it is there at a new level that wasn't there when people would sort of passively come to church. It's a very active church participation. And so that also really helps the intensity of the environment, particularly during worship, because you just see a lot more physical engagement with worship in the environment, which really it's probably greater than it would have been, if the room was 100% capacity full with people shoulder to shoulder, because you just had a lot more people that were passively attending, not actively attending, if that makes sense. And so I think that's a dynamic that I've witnessed. So it actually creates a really healthy experience, and from my perspective. And we're adding services right now, and we've been adding, we've seen quite a bit of growth in people attending physically, since we started back. But it's different, and yet I think effective at the same time.
Yeah, I've seen that over the years. I used to write about it, about when you come to worship with a spirit of anticipation and expectation. And like you said, when people were starved for a season with that in-person gathering being missing and being purely online, if they prefer to meet with people in line, they come back with this excitement and this expectation, and it changes the dynamic in the room. And it's something for people to think about as we talk about navigating this new season. With that intensity of density, if you are in a state where they say, I was talking to Carrie Newhoff last week, and they could only have 5 people capacity in Canada. And so how do you do something with a group of 5? But if you're in California where the max is 100 people, or a state where it's 50 people or 25% capacity of what the room can hold, how do you get creative and innovative and use things like things to block off sections and pipe and drape and making the room feel smaller, so you have that intensity and density to make it feel full and exciting and not dead, like you said, the opposite where it's dead. You guys, you have great resources on open.life.Church, and I watched the video when you guys were first opening back up. You had one of your team members talk about creating a touchless experience and creating gatherings where people feel safe in this pandemic season, where they feel safe coming to church. And so I shared that widely, and I encourage people to check it out. I want to talk about just the mindset as we wrap up. You guys are such an innovative church. I know you say you're not a large church, but some would disagree. You are a very large church, but you don't have that mindset. You were talking earlier about moving like a school of fish as opposed to a big, giant oil tanker that has to slowly turn. Talk about the mindset. You're at a high level at Life.Church and part of the directional leadership team. As you guys lead an organization like this, we'll just say a unique organization, whether you call it large or not, but in 36 locations and a global audience. What is your mindset that you would encourage people to have as we navigate this new season of ministry in 2020 and beyond?
Yeah, so you reference a couple of mindsets that we have here internally, which one is that we're not a mega church, but we're a micro church with a mega vision is a mindset. That's something I've talked to all of our team about many times. I've talked to any new team members that join our team. And it's not really because there's baggage with the word mega church. It's because it's just simply not true. I mean, the label is a label of comparison to other churches, but it's not a label of comparison to mission or comparison to opportunity. And so when we see the number of people that are in our communities physically and then the communities we serve, and virtually and digitally via the reach that we have through Church Online, the number of people that actually come and the number of people that we actually serve is teeny tiny, super small by comparison to the need that's there. In fact, I almost think it's insulting if we started to say it was large. It kind of it's just not even so far from reality. And while people say, well, that's just semantics, and you're just, kind of using words to say, I said, no, it's really mindset, because our mindsets are really powerful, how they affect the way we think and the decisions we make. Because if we think that we're large, as an example of taking the same mindset, then inherently you start to say things like, well, it takes a lot of effort to turn a large ship. You can't just turn on a dime, because some people, they can do that, but we can't because we've got a lot of staff, a lot of considerations, and a lot of this. You stop taking risks, or at least you take really small risks. You might call it a risk, but it's really not a risk because you're thinking, well, I've got a lot to lose because you're thinking big. You're thinking you're big. But if you're a church startup, in a city, and it's just you and your wife, or you and your husband, and you're thinking, man, we're gonna take this city for Jesus and share the gospel of this city, you have nothing to lose. In fact, you might spend everything you have, getting that church started. So you got nothing to lose. You got everything to gain. So you're all in on risk taking. And I think the mindset that not just churches, but any organization has, if they think that they're large or they see themselves that way, is you better be sure that the vision that you have and the need that you see outside of the walls of your church is so massive, that by comparison, you see yourself small, or you'll stop taking risks. You'll feel like you've got more to lose. And that's just an example of how a mindset affects the way that we think. I think when it comes to this time that we're in right now, and what we've been going through, with the pandemic, I think it's been a great example of where churches were forced into innovation, and I think it's healthy because sometimes the thing that held us back was a mindset. It's like, well, the way things work here, the way what our people will accept is this, or, this is the most change that anybody could accept, or even theological. That was really fascinating. We had a lot of people for many years that theologically were opposed to Church Online, said it wasn't real church or real community, and thought that it was wrong. And I understand there's different theological perspectives. We've heard these, for years, and I'm not one to be critical of other people's theology, but they were definitely critical of our approach with church online. So it's really interesting to how everybody's theology aligned in March, because all of a sudden quickly it was not just okay, but this was the best way, or the most acceptable way. And I don't want to be kind of flippant about that in my response, other than just to say that what the pandemic did was it shifted us off of ways of mindsets that we had, where we weren't even open to kind of considering alternatives or looking at other ideas. And it thrust everybody into a mode of saying, we've got a problem to solve, a really big problem to solve. And so now I need a whole new set of creative ideas. And I'm willing to try some things that have never been tried before. For some churches, this was an existential threat, in the sense that I don't know if we'll exist as a local church if we don't figure out how to work through meeting and gathering and connecting as a church, and for other churches, it may not have been an existential threat in the way that they saw it, but it may have been just a moment where they said, okay, we've always talked about trying it. We never had the time or the focus to try this. And now's the time, to try it because we can bring this level of energy and focus. So I think the key mindset to take away from it is there'll come a point in time, obviously, where the pandemic is no longer the focus of our attention, our energy. That's not hard to presume. Anyone that's a futurist or anyone that can just rationally think about the future knows that we will not have a future that's so fundamentally different that nothing will look the same, and church will not be the same, and community won't be the same. I'm not the one that says there won't be impacts and won't be things that we gain and learn from it, but to presume that people will never gather together again is a really naive presumption about the future. So that's what the future will entail. So the thing we got to be sure of, though, is as we walk into that future and as that happens, over time, that we don't lose the perspective that shows kind of how silly our preconceived mindsets were going into the pandemic of what would work and what wouldn't work, about how resilient the church was or how not resilient we thought the church was. I think we can't forget kind of what we've been through, because if we walk to the future with that in mind and keeping that perspective, then it'll help the church thrive as we move forward. We'll catch ourselves with those phrases that say, well, this is the way it works and the way it's always worked. Well, is that the way it's always worked? Did it work that way in March? Did it work that way in April? And the answer may very well be, well, I guess there are times where it doesn't work that way, or there are times where we could try something new, or perhaps we should go ahead and see, before we kind of cut this idea off and see if it's effective. And I think in an encouraging front, though, I think while there are definitely some churches that are struggling, there's some churches that won't and haven't survived, the pandemic in terms of their ability to function as a local church. It's definitely clear that the capital C church isn't just going to survive, but going to thrive, through this pandemic. And many local churches that would have presumed that their church was maybe less resilient. Like if we ever had to shut the doors of our church, for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months, we'd never make it, kind of thing. I think there's a lot of pastors now that need to not forget the fact that the church is far more resilient than we think it is. And while I don't ever wish that the doors of our church need to be closed. In fact, I think it's horrible, that we don't have in the places where we haven't been able to meet in our communities or have the doors open. What I think the takeaway is the church is resilient, though. The church is about people. The church was never about a building. The church is never about a structure or an institution. The church is about people. And so we just let that empower the thinking, the ideas, the innovation that we have as we go forward in reaching our communities and being a light to our cities. And I think that's what I hope people leave or walk through this pandemic and leave this pandemic with, as a mindset that just says there's a lot more we can do, a lot more we should try to do, and a lot more mindsets that have been holding us back that we need to consciously be aware of as we move forward, not to find ourselves in the same trap again.
That's good. I like that. The church is resilient. It's prevailed 2020 years, and it's just can't be stopped. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so you guys are a testament to that, and you're helping so many churches. Let's just celebrate what God has done. You had told me before we started, you had a stat of how many people have come to Christ through your online churches since March. And tell us that number.
Yeah. So when the pandemic hit and the churches closed, we have a platform to make church online available for other churches to use. And we've had that for years. But of course, at that moment in time, it became really a significant thing that a lot of churches needed. So we have over 30,000 churches that signed up to use the platform, and most of them within a matter of just a few weeks. And so there was quite a bit of work to sort of onboard 30,000 churches. But what's encouraging, what's exciting to me is that from the point we're recording this call, from March until this point, we've seen over 430,000 people make decisions to follow Jesus across those churches that are using the platform combined. And that's about one every 30 seconds is what we see. Now, obviously, it doesn't happen every 30 seconds, but it happens in bunches. But you get the idea. The point is God's using these tools and these technologies to reach people, to lead people to him. And whether it's physical or digital engagement or using the Bible app to turn to God's word, during times of uncertainty, we're seeing just God use this entire moment that we're in, this entire season that we're in, as an opportunity to pull people and draw people close to him. And that's super exciting. It should be exciting, I think, for every believer.
It is. And, you talk about one salvation every 30 seconds. One thing that you guys have done for a long time, way before everybody else, and I think this is a key learning experience as we wrap up here this talk, as we navigate a new season, something that I have said for years and I learned from watching Life.Church is that Sunday, the worship experience doesn't have to be Sunday morning at 11 a.m. You have services constantly happening. I turned on my Roku the other day and caught an online experience happening as it was going live. I mean, you can, in this season where churches have got up to speed with technology and they have got up to speed with streaming, and they're using maybe church online platform, Chop, or another service, Facebook Live, they're streaming to YouTube, whatever they may be doing. They don't have to do it Sunday at 11. I mean, you can have a Tuesday 7 p.m. service, a Wednesday 11 a.m. service, a Friday 3 p.m. service. What has that been like for you guys? Because you had the foresight to do this years ago, to just offer several. And I know you run Google ads and are pointing people to online experiences. But what was it like to have this concept of it doesn't have to be Sunday morning at 11 a.m. We can broadcast. Because right now, I told churches, I wrote a blog post about change your homepage and let them know when the next experience starts, and have like a countdown of we're going live again at this time, or we're going to stream the service again or rebroadcast. But what is that like for you guys to just constantly have experiences?
Yeah. So, I mean, as years ago, as the church was growing in a multi-site context and at individual locations, there used to be kind of mental barriers about how many services you could have. A church might have one on Sunday and then do two on Sunday. And if you're really, really going to risk it, you might do three, on Sunday. And we kind of realized that was really a mental barrier that wasn't real. And then we started doing Saturday night. We did two on Saturday night, and then we did 4 on Sunday morning and 2 on Sunday night. And this is what we were doing in our physical church environments. We have church, pre-pandemic, we would have multiple services at some campuses on Monday night.
Right.
And so we do Saturday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night, all the same service, just different options at different times for people. And we were seeing God use that to reach a lot of people that for various reasons, Sunday morning wasn't a time that they could come, their work schedule or just the type of job that they have or whatever that might be. And so with online, that became magnified, right? Because now we're reaching people in different time zones, different parts of the world. And so we began to say, is there really like a reason it even has to be on the weekend? Is there not, can you have church at noon on Friday? Can you have, and so we've had for many years, I think as many as 80, 85 services a week at church online, different times of the day and night. We have volunteer teams, of course, that lead those. That's the way we were able to scale to that number. But we see people come to Jesus on a Tuesday at 3:00, in the afternoon. The thing about Jesus is people need Jesus 24/7. The need doesn't arise on Sunday morning at 9:00, and people are hurting 24/7. Their marriage didn't have a marriage problem at 11 a.m. on Sunday. or just before that, they had a marriage problem at Monday at 7:00, and they had a really tough situation that they're dealing with, and they're looking for an answer. And that's why we see them turn to things like the Bible app. We see them download the app from the store, and they're dealing with anxiety or depression, wanting to commit suicide even. And at that dark moment, that just didn't line up and happen to happen on Sunday morning when there was a church service available. And so it doesn't mean that everyone has the capacity to be open 24/7. It doesn't mean that you get there by deciding one day you're going to be open all the time and you just immediately start doing that. Everything I'm saying happened kind of incrementally, sort of one service by one service, one at a time. But I think the mental barriers that we put in place to just say, well, this is the only time people will come. This is the only time we can reach people, or our staff, is not big enough to do this many. Well, we had the same problem, but we just figured out we could do it without staff. And that's how we figured out how to grow through it. I think just recognize at the end of the day, who are we trying to reach? Who are we trying to serve? And once we realize it's not ourselves, then we realize that it's all these people out there that are hurting and dealing with situations day and night. And they don't really want to wait 7 days before they can find help and find community and find somebody to pray with. They're looking for something right now. And if the church isn't present and the church isn't there in that moment, there's many other vices and other types of things that people are going to turn to. And I don't mean to say that in a frightening way. I just mean to say that that's, I think, the opportunity and the challenge that we face. And so we definitely have tried to figure out how to adapt ministry to something that's happening all the time or near all the time, at least at a span that doesn't require someone to wait very long before they can connect in community.
That's good. That's good. And what's great about these resources, people are always asking me, how do we get people more engaged? If they're watching online, if they're stuck at home, if they have pre-existing conditions, if they have health issues, if they're scared, if they don't want to come, how do we keep them not just being an eyeball, but to be engaged? And they talk about using chat features and things like that. And all that's built into Church Online platform. It's a free tool. Check it out. And I just want to thank you on behalf of church leaders everywhere for your church's generosity and you guys leading the way, and you in a lot of ways leading the way personally as Bobby and with vision casting and offering these resources. I personally use YouVersion Bible app every day. I am highlighting and going through Bible plans, and it's just such a blessing to believers and unbelievers everywhere, for those that stumble across the Bible app. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much, and thank you for being a part of this conference.
Well, we're very honored to do all that, and also thank you to you. You've submitted a Bible plan, and it's actually one of our really popular plans on YouVersion, and so we're grateful for people like yourself that not only tell people about, but also are contributing and making it possible for people to connect to God's Word. But we're honored to be able to serve in any way that we can the church. We've been tremendously blessed, as you heard me talk about earlier, through doing it, and we'll continue to double down on it, just continue to do more and more and more as we go. And hopefully along the way, we're already seeing this happen. We're seeing many other churches, many other people inspired to do the same. And so we're seeing them step up and say, look, we can be a part of contributing to things that we have. We're all part of the big body of Christ, and we all have different parts and roles that we can play in it. And so thank you for playing a part and a role in this as well, and getting information out to people and sharing what God's doing, and highlighting some best practices and things that are happening. You play a really important role as well, and this conference does as well. So thank you for the opportunity to share. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. God bless you.